So reminder, this, as Michelle mentioned, this is our workshop, Algorithmically Encoded Identities/Bodies. I'm going to skip a few slides. Just to recap what we did last time. Our goals for the workshop are making visible classificatory work that are engaged within our own practice, examining the ethical and political dimensions of this work and understanding the impacts and harms of individuals from marginalized communities, and developing a set of practices that can help researchers that remain self-critical in their work, creating, using, and studying classification systems. We're in the second part of the agenda here on December 3rd. That is today. I'm going to work through two different exercises here, so it's going to be much more hands-on. And just as a reminder here, this is where the microsite is. So I'll let you take a second to navigate there because we're going to start off with our first exercise that's linked from the microsite. It's much easier for you to click that link than to enter into the link that the next exercise is. So go there if you haven't. Okay, I'm assuming everyone's there. And then we'll drop it in the chat too. So I'm going to skip past all these real quick and start with, we went through torquing the individual last time with Dylan. I'm going to go and skip now to the exercise called Choose Your Own Administrative Violence Adventure. So there's a link on the page on the microsite. Yes, thank you for linking us, Dylan and Ollie and Michelle and Dion. And what I want you to do is to go into this this exercise, which is should look a bit like this when you enter it. So this is what it looks like. I'm going to switch back and get to the, oops, present this again and get into full. And what I want you to do is to work through this, and we're going to talk about this at the end. But basically, you are Bo, that's your character, and you're going to be working through kind of a day in the life of this individual. So I'm going to go ahead and just give you about 5 to 10 minutes to work through this. And when you're done doing this, since we're such a small group, doesn't make sense to really use a breakout room. We're going to reconvene and go through some discussion questions here. So we'll just start here. I'll leave it here. And let's just go ahead and work through this on your own. And when you're done, you just, you can say so in the chat or wave a hand or do something of that nature. Let's come back together again. And since we're such a small group here, which is wonderful, why don't we can go through some of these discussion questions. So, this is kind of a choose your own adventure game modeled under, the kind of old ones that many of us grew up with. At least in my late millennial generation, we played a lot of these growing up. They're little books. And so there's 3 discussion questions. So we can start kind of working through each of these. And so the first one here is asking, what are the points in which administrative practice, like forms and policies, caused harm to your character? So yeah, feel free to just raise your hand and then go ahead and go for it. Yeah, Michelle.
So I think initially it was the stress of whether or not to go to work or go into the appointment that was available that day, which, probably applies to all sorts of people and isn't specific to Bo's character. But then it would be, the process of filling out the form at the local doctor's office. and having to pick a gender or sex. Was kind of the first spot. I'll let others share theirs.
Yeah, for sure. So even choosing to go to the office and then filling out forms. Dion?
I think there was a lot of emotional moments as well. So when it said, I think it was gender disorder or something like that. So they didn't recognize it as something legitimate. And then I was actually particularly surprised when I was particularly surprised by it was yes, when they said that they track the the hormones when they come in. And I thought, well, why? And it wasn't until I reached the essay at the end I realized, oh, they're trying to track for like terrorists? Really? Terrorists? Always terrorists? Oh my goodness. Yeah, so that was something that surprised me. And that was an administrative practice that just limits what people can do.
Yeah. And I mean, I think as a controlled substance, I don't know the details exactly of controlling for testosterone. If anyone else does, please jump in. But like, I know that there's definitely like, because it's a controlled substance, it is also, testosterone is also considered like a performance enhancer for like doping. And so I think on the schedule of drugs that gets tracked. So yeah, that's correct, Michelle. So then it is, and then it does then get manifest into this kind of like terrorism, national security thing, especially after 9/11. Yeah, for some reason I can't see your name, the person.
Oh, it's Allison.
Yeah, Allison. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was struck by, as it went further and further into the story, a lot of the things I would tend to label as like, oh, these are systemic barriers. And I was thinking about the relationship between what I think of as sort of systemic injustice and systemic barriers, and then administrative processes and things like, the decision about scheduling in a doctor's office. And, the fact that, okay, we're determining that it's 3 months because other people booked in advance. And why is it done that way? Does it have to be done that way? Are there alternatives to think about how that could be done? And so, it's been a truth in my work and in my life to sort of recognize that these large systemic injustices often actually come from rather routine administrative decisions about how resources get allocated. But I think, at least for me, initially, I had a hard time labeling those as administrative. I had to kind of take a step back into how did that get decided? How did it get decided that they had to have a follow-up appointment to be able to get the hormones? Why are those things set up the way that they are?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Yeah, Dion.
Like something that struck me as interesting was that while it's a combination of administrative, it was also the online forums that said, yeah, we get this experience all the time with discriminatory practices at different clinics. And so something that isn't in the system, something that you can't write down as this is a discriminatory clinic, like it narrows down your options, and then the administration starts bottlenecking it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of seen as it's kind of a vector, then another vector of kind of administration. Allison and then Michelle.
Oh, well, I was going to follow up on Allison's point and say that, the delay in appointments is actually an explicit decision to kind of treat people on a first come, first serve, as opposed to kind of having some sort of triage to figure out urgency of need, which would be an alternative process. So it is that kind of mundane, kind of whoever gets the appointment first gets the appointment, as opposed to somehow trying to figure out who needs the appointment the most. Yeah, no, that's true. There's Dion saying that, there's triage of need is also going to be a classification bugger. Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that's so much the sort of I don't think it's possible with any of these kinds of decisions about how you allocate resources that you're not going to do harm. And it really does become about kind of what's the choice that gets made. And then are there ways to be able to register when the consequence of that choice are very severe for you in any kind of way to be able to challenge against it.
Absolutely. We're kind of already getting into the second question. So the second question asks, what administrative changes could have mitigated these harms? And like I think we're already getting at, there's not really like a right answer here, because some of these can't really be mitigated on an administrative level, but let's talk about it. So what are certain kinds of administrative processes that possibly could have mitigated some of the harms embedded here? And by administrative changes, I mean, yeah, actually, I'll just leave it open. I saw a hand, a physical hand, and the person in the middle. And I don't. It's not showing me names weirdly. But go ahead.
I just thought that maybe some of the forms required updating. I mean, obviously, it's not being inclusive, and we're missing out on a whole bunch of categories or different identities, I should say, not categories. God love me. But that the form needed an overhaul, and that could have, lessened the emotions that the individual felt. And then also, I mean, the receptionist, I'm sure she was feeling awkward as well, because, just like a funeral, you don't know what to say to someone. And I mean, there's no really course on how we say or how we address someone now that we have and I mean, I'm speaking from my own self too, because I mean, I'm older than all of you, and I don't know all the categories, and I don't know what the right way is to address people, but I don't know what I don't know. So I have to, that knowledge has to be imparted on me.
Yeah. So two things I brought up, and thank you for highlighting, thank you for sharing. The first thing is just the categories of gender. And I think categories is fine to say, because I think, I would say that we are bigger than the boxes that we put us in, I think another workshop that Emily and Dylan and I run is actually called, like, what is it? We contain multitudes. So it's literally the name. So it's sort of the idea of like having, we have to put ourselves into these categories for the purpose of administrative sorting. And so we talked about in the last exercise the kind of necessity to have different kind of categorization schema for gender and what they serve and what ends. The second thing is sort of the administrative changes that could be done. They're maybe not quite as administrative, but they are training oriented towards, kind of having trans affirmative care for healthcare providers and what that entails. And I don't know if the receptionist was felt okay, I mean, or anxious, or I've been to plenty of places where the receptionists couldn't give a shit. so because if you've been to the DMV, they're optimizing towards efficiency and not necessarily, they're just like rude to everyone at the DMV, so it's fine. Yeah, Allison.
I think one of the things that's coming to my mind is when you start to kind of unpack all of the structural things that are going on, and then what are the resources that have been built up in communities that are dealing with this constantly. And so I'm thinking about there's an online community where people can empathize, but is there are probably people in that community that also have some medical knowledge. And so is there a way to be able to almost like hand people in a clinic very sort of specific information about the common experience, and maybe they're going to be able to deal with it and maybe they're not. But I think about I've been thinking of I did some work many years ago on access to medical care in remote First Nations areas. And, they ended up having to build their own healthcare networks because there was so much deep systematic oppression and then just lack of access to healthcare in those systems. And so, I think some of the sort of glimpses into the LGBTQ plus community that I have, it seems like there's just been a lot of movement to try to either sort of collectively push along the system or to set up alternative services, alternative therapists, alternative healthcare providers that are going to be less awful, and then doing this education of the rest of the system. And it's a huge burden to put on communities, but it feels like when I think of marginalized community after marginalized community, how much that's been the path to being able to just get really basic services and basic care.
Yeah. I mean, and there's definitely examples of this. I appreciate you bringing this up because there's been sort of thinking about kind of alternative services in healthcare. I'm thinking about also kind of different services in data sovereignty and with Indigenous communities. I'm thinking about the First Nations. I forgot the title of it, the name of it, the First Nations Data Network. Yeah, there's the OCAP principles. I'm thinking of was it FGI? Yeah, FGI GC. Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So like thinking about where even data sovereignty comes in and sort of like who's even managing one's data and the categorizations. When it comes to healthcare, I mean, there's also been the kind of claiming of, some of these services can be, they're not ameliorated versus in these administrative levels. And there have been ways, and, there's always been sort of like underground economies of care, of getting hormones, of even of doing surgeries that have been underground. And I mean, this is like, and so this is sort of, leapfrogging the kind of administrative to come up with these kind of networks of care, mutual aid that have focused on this. So this is sort of getting into the third question, which I'll wrap up, is sort of what systemic changes could have been mitigated some of these harms. And this is a very US-centric kind of thing where it's, the kind of nightmare that is US healthcare, but it's also, I mean, these kinds of issues persist in Canada and elsewhere too. But what kind of systemic changes could have mitigated some of these harms? Michelle?
I would say, the supply issue is a problem. And that is also true in Canada as well. Having to travel 4 hours or going to another province to get the care that you need because there aren't sufficient numbers of medical professionals that provide that care locally. That's in addition, of course, to kind of training the frontline family doctors, as we call them in Canada, to be more familiar with the medical needs of all of their patients. But that's at least one.
Yeah, absolutely. Dion?
Wait, do you actually know my name or are you reading it? Because you said the names aren't there.
I remember from last time, there's only 9 people here. So now I remember your name.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, sorry. I feel honored. But I don't know what change could be done exactly, but on the employment front, like with the boss, I know that, for example, like taking mental health days and taking like just you shouldn't have to justify it and you shouldn't have to protect yourself from there's just such this system of, especially slightly pre-pandemic, of you're just lucky to have work and you're just lucky that we're giving you a job, and you're providing them a service as well, and so there's just this power imbalance there that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. So even the kind of like system of wage employment and the necessity of, needing to justify one's own, health status. Allison.
This piece around kind of what actually needs to be done at any given point and where you actually need to see a doctor. And so, again, I'm thinking about work that I did in a First Nations context where like they just dismantled the expectations of what had to have a doctor looking at it and train people in the community to be able to do all of the front end work, all of the assessment, and then have a doctor be able to sort of come on digitally on the phone, have all of that information, and then just double check. And so, the fact that we have the system of care for medicine that we have, and it's very much driven by the financial considerations, but that's not the only way that we could provide quality care, and that there are examples of completely different ways of providing medical services.
Yeah, absolutely. Dion.
Totally forgot we didn't address the fact that that the year wait, you have to be identifying as a male for a year, and then it's different across different states and different areas what you have to do as a precursor to what you want to do. That's just a ridiculous barrier.
Yeah, so that was for a time part of the WPATH standards of care, and I think that's changed. I don't even know, but it's kind of like even if it's not known, there could be kind of different levels of training. So we're about 8:07, and I'd encourage you all, if you haven't, to read the essay at the end on your own time, and then it's pretty short. And yeah, but then I'm going to go ahead now and pass it on to Emily. And I'm going to stop sharing so they can share. Who's going to run us through the classification analytics exercise?
There we go. Okay, so here is a link to this exercise we're going to do. You don't actually have to pull it up, but just so you have it for reference, and it's also linked on the microsite. This is an exercise essentially in critical self-reflection. So the aim here is to kind of take a classification system that y'all have familiarity with and you want to kind of explore in a little bit more depth, and kind of use this analytic and use the various perspectives that are in this room to try and understand this classification system, who might fit well within it, who might kind of fall within the cracks, and what the various implications are given the way in which it's being used. So typically we would kind of run this in breakout rooms of with a couple of different people. I'm inclined to just kind of keep us as a group and kind of work through this together. So this means that we're going to kind of settle upon like one classification system that we're going to analyze as a group. So before deciding that, I'm just going to run through kind of what the exercise looks like. And then we can, kind of pick a classification system that we want to analyze. So I'll kind of go through this briefly. If you want to use this analytic afterwards, you can kind of read through it in depth. But the basic idea is we want to pick something to explore. And this classification system could come from a variety of different sources. It could be something maybe that you utilized in your own research. Maybe it's a sociodemographic classification system that you use to inform participant selection into a study. Or maybe you ran a survey and you had categories that kind of structured your data analysis after the fact. Or maybe it's just something that you encountered in your daily life. You're logging into some platform service and you have to, enter a bunch of information about yourself and kind of classify yourself into a couple of different boxes. So it's pretty, there's a lot of options for different systems we can choose here. It would be good to pick something that at least one person in the group has some degree of familiarity with. But one of the key things here is that everybody's going to have a different sort of relationship to this system. And so, different folks might understand it in different ways. And that's sort of the point of the exercise. Again, this is kind of, reiterating some of the stuff we went over in the initial lecture, but individual perspectives and kind of relative relationships with a classification system is going to shape one's understanding. And so each of us might have different experiences with the system in question. So we're going to go through a series of questions then, just kind of documenting where was this system used? What purpose did it serve? What was it classifying? Is it classifying people or human experiences or something else? What is the categorical structure? Just what categories are in the system? How do you kind of map an input to a particular category? What's that process? We'll go through residuality, which just as a reminder is residual categories are those sort of not elsewhere classified categories. So this helps us probe kind of who falls into the cracks of this system. And we'll just kind of explore what are the residual categories, what happens to them. And then also explore a little bit about the origins of the system. And this can be a little bit tricky because maybe depending on the system we pick, maybe one of you designed it. Or maybe we are utilizing some kind of categorical system that, has kind of deep roots in some kind of, history of research or whatnot. And we don't really know how it came about. And then we'll consider kind of stakeholders, and this will be very context dependent, depending on kind of how this system is being used and for what purpose. So that's kind of where we're going to go. So I think to start, does anybody have a system that they want to explore? Any suggestions?